Hi, everyone. Welcome to Six Figure Authors, the show that helps you take your writing career to the next level. I'm Andrea Pearson, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Lindsay Baroker.
And I'm Joe Lalo.
A little bit of a mic muting thing there. Okay, so today we're interviewing Dean Wesley Smith. Dean is an incredibly prolific New York Times and USA Today bestselling mystery and science fiction author. Some of the franchises he's written novels for might be familiar to our listeners. They include Star Trek, X-Men, Smallville, Aliens, Men in Black, and Spider-Man. And then he's been focusing a lot on mysteries. His most known mystery series is Cold Poker Gang that takes place in Vegas, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Hi.
And he and his wife, author Kristine Kathryn Rusch, teach multiple workshops and courses through their company, WMG Publishing. So, thank you for joining us for the episode today.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
Yeah. Dean and I, Dean does the business masterclass that I've been attending, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. The service that he and Kristine offer. Authors. Can you tell what kind of day I've had today?
Yeah.
Since before we started recording. All right. Okay, so we're just going to go right into questions, if that's all right with everyone. And the first question I've got here is, you've been writing and publishing for a really long time, like really, really, really long time.
Yeah, really, really long time. And I still have hair, which is just a shock.
And you're a huge inspiration for me and other authors. My question was, what was your big break? Oh man, we're gonna do this. When it came to publishing, and how did it prepare you for a lifetime of writing?
My big break? Actually, I think it was a whole series of them, to be honest with you. I think the thing that set me on the right track after a whole bunch of years of being on the wrong track was discovering a 1947 book that had Heinlein's rules in it. Once I climbed on Heinlein's rules and started writing regularly and following Heinlein's rules best I could, I started selling. I had done that when I first initially started way back in the early 70s, and then fallen off of it and went into another, what all the English teachers taught, which is not how to be a professional writer. And once I discovered Heinlein's rules and business rules, from that point on, I started selling. And then from that, along the next 7 or 8 years, I think the breaks kind of came one at a time. I was in the very first volume of Writers of the Future, which introduced me to a lot of people, a lot of big names, things like that. And then I sold my first novel in 1987 to Warner Books. And from there, it just sort of picked up steam. We did Pulp House Publishing back in the late 80s, early 90s, and just picked up steam from there. And it just sort of been on and on. Just every time it sort of stops, I do it again, climb back on. So, and indie publishing was a big break when it came around. Yeah.
I'm curious how you got involved with all the Hollywood writing for them. Was that kind of in the 90s?
Yes, that was, actually, I had bought a story for the first incarnation of Pulp House magazine. I was the editor. It was our magazine. Pulp House Publishing was our company. And I bought a story from a gentleman by the name of John Ordover, who had just within months after that got a job as the Star Trek editor at Pocketbooks. And so he was calling to talk with Chris. At that point, Chris was editing the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. And he was talking to Chris about something, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I just took this new job. Are you guys interested in writing Star Trek?" And I had back in the 60s, I had gone home from high school and first years of college every Friday night to watch an episode of Star Trek, because there was no such thing as reruns or, taping or anything else. So I literally wouldn't do things on Friday night just because of Star Trek. I was that level of fan. And so when John said, "You want to write one?" we said, "Sure." And it just sort of took off from there. And but you have to already have a career before you can get into writing for the major media markets. And I'd already sold novels, had been around. We had Pulp House. I had already been in and out of New York a lot. It was just, they basically were looking for fans that were also professional writers. And they found it with me and Chris. Chris went on to write Star Wars. I went on to write, the X-Men and Spider-Man and things like that. So.
Yeah, that seemed like kind of a golden era for that stuff. I remember Next Generation came out, and that was sort of when all the books started coming out.
Yeah.
Like before that, because I was a fan too. As a kid, I watched the reruns, but and I was looking all over, and I was so excited when the Star Trek books were coming out.
Yeah, they actually they'd been coming out before then, but they were written by fans that weren't professional writers, so they weren't very good. They were basically beginning writers, trying to write these, and they just had no sales and everything else. Vonda McIntyre. One of her first books was a Star Trek book. And she was the first time that they had brought a true professional to write a Star Trek book. This was before Chris and I started writing and some of the others. And Peter David, I was in that era. Vonda was slightly ahead. She was one that sort of led the way that made New York realize, wait a minute, we need professional writers to write these media books. And that's when that whole era started. And that's when they became better sellers. We had I had one of the Star Trek books that hit the Times list, and I think it's still making royalties for us, minor, but I think it's like 1.4 million copies now on one of them. That would be unheard of in today's market, of course, but back then that was a good selling book, and so it was just it was bringing the professionals in. So it sort of was the golden era, but now there's still professionals writing them all. A writer by the name of Dayton Ward is doing his best to catch me. I bought his first short story in a Star Trek anthology as an editor, and now he's the second most published Star Trek writer. I'm the first most published Star Trek writer. He's the second most. And I got a hunch he's going to catch me because I don't write anymore on Star Trek. But Dayton's doing fantastic. Yeah, they're still really good books. Still really good.
Excellent. I haven't read them for a while, but I enjoyed it. I spent a whole year reading nothing but Star Trek and hiding the covers because I was in school, like middle school or something. And girls didn't read that kind of stuff. Other girls were hiding the covers because they were romance, smutty novels. I was hiding my spaceship covers.
Actually, there were more women writing Star Trek during that period than men. L.A. Graff were two women writing together under that pen name. And then, of course, Diana and I'm not good with names, but there were three or four women writing Star Trek in that period in the stable of Star Trek writers. And I think it was me and Peter David and Michael, somebody. I think we were the only ones that were the men writing. So there were actually more women writing Star Trek in that golden era. And there was only 7 or 8 of us in the stable. So we wrote all the Star Trek books, sometimes under other names. But we wrote them all during that period of time for probably about 7, 8, 9 years. Almost a whole decade of just the 7 of us writing Star Trek. That was it.
All right. Well, good work if you can get it. But what made you transition eventually from doing that to kind of going independent and starting your own publishing company?
I was fed up with New York, mostly. We had Pulp House Publishing back in the early. We started it in '87, and it lasted till the early '90s. So we didn't want to do a publishing company again. But I was pretty fed up with New York. The contracts were changing. The whole respect for authors was changing. I had over 106 novels published in New York through traditional publishing. And by that point, I was just done. I had been at it for 15 years and didn't really want to do it anymore. So I went off and did something else for a few years. Nobody noticed. I still wrote a few other books, and I was ghosting books and things like that. But I just was tired of the system. And so indie publishing is what turned me back to my own books.
That's excellent. And sort of leads me into my question. So you had a tremendous career by pretty much any measure. You already had an incredible career. And then you went on to indie publishing. Was your previous career an asset or a liability when it came to getting started as an indie?
No, it was a liability. It was a huge liability. I hear it from a lot of early writers that, oh, you were so lucky you had all this. No, I didn't have any books. My original books were under pen names that were do not disclose, because if I wrote a mystery or a thriller, it couldn't be, they couldn't say, oh, this is Dean Wesley Smith writing as, because Star Trek writer Dean Wesley Smith, because the Star Trek and the Men in Black and the Spider-Man and X-Men, that really hurt original books back in those days. They really tainted them. So I always wrote original books under other names. Then when it started up indie, what happened is all those books were for sale on Amazon. And so I'd put up a short story or a collection or something, and it would be on page 43, because all my Star Trek and the X-Men and all of that were filling the first pages. I couldn't get any traction at all. And so the only way that I could do it was just to sit down and either change my name and go to a completely and start up with a brand new name, or to overwhelm my own career. And I had 106 books out under that old career. And so I had to overwhelm it and basically become which is why I started, writing a lot. I published anywhere from 15 to 25 major books a year for those numbers of years. And I published them what I called stealth. I just turned them, gave them to my people at WMG Publishing and said, publish them. Don't promote them. Just publish them. And so eventually I overwhelmed. So now if you look on Amazon on like my author page or something like that, on the first page, you'll see like one media book and all the rest will be my originals. But it's taken me, 6, 7, 8 years to finally overwhelm those books. So they were a tremendous detriment. Although I don't regret doing them, I love doing them.
That's an interesting problem to have to solve. Do you feel like the career prior to your indie career, like, did it give you the tools necessary to make that uncomfortable transition?
It gave me the understanding that I could be patient and that things took years to get done. That was probably the biggest thing it gave me. It gave me a lot of practice and writing skills, of course. But when you're writing only media for a while, which I was for a number of years, you develop one skill set while other skill sets atrophy. And, and so creating original characters and stuff, I didn't need to do that because they were already created for me in Star Trek and all that. The characters were already there. So having to balance my skill sets back up took some time. So that was a negative, but it was also a positive because I had gotten certain skill sets up so much higher with all the years of practice. But by and large, it was the attitude. It was understanding the business. It was understanding freelancing. It was understanding patience. So I could just say, well, I'm going to do 5 or 6 years here and not tell anybody I'm publishing anything. On my own website, I don't even announce when I put out a new book. I just don't. I just write them and put them out. And, so I've written over 100 books now in indie. And WMG started promoting last year with the Cold Poker Gang finally because it started to take off. But that's it. I just put them out. I might change that this next year now that I've got it to where I want it to be. I may actually start telling people, oh, I just finished and it's just out or something like that. But if I told everybody every time I wrote and finished something, that's all my blog would be. It'd be, every 2 or 3 days. Oh, I got this out every, they get bored enough when I promote the workshops all the time. So, it's just one of those things where when you're prolific, you just can't do. If you only have 1 or 2 novels a year, you can promote. If you have, 25 or 30 things a year, you can't promote.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem. I'm actually, kind of in the book a month area most months, so I understand. But yeah, I think a lot of our listeners are probably like, I cannot quite imagine that. But a good problem to have a lot of, you've got such a big backlist and stuff too, that if they want to, work on promoting that, I'm sure they have all sorts of material to do.
Too much, actually, sometimes. Too much. We don't know which one to do next, which one to push next, so. They decided the Cold Poker Gang was what they were going to push when I turned one in a year ago in the summer. And I was moving Chris down here to Vegas and we were busy. And they finally, convinced me that I should just let them do what they wanted to do. We have really good people at WMG Publishing. And so I turned this book in and they said, can we promote it? And I said, I don't care. I'm too busy. Do what you want. And they turned it into this major best-selling series just by promoting it because nobody knew all those books were there.
So. Oh, that's excellent. And I'm curious, I don't know if we specified, is WMG just you and Chris, or do you publish other authors also?
Well, we publish other authors in our 2 magazines. We have Fiction River, which is a, basically a quarterly anthology series. And Chris and I co-edit that, but basically that's Chris's. She loves it. She keeps track of it. It's been going now for, I think we're up in almost 30, number 30 or in the 30s on volumes now. It's been going for quite a while. It gets lots of attention on the literary sides, the literary awards, things like that. It gets no attention because we mix genres. We'll have a romance story right beside a mystery story, right beside a science fiction story. And so we get no attention inside the genres other than mystery tends to give it a lot of attention. And then we have Pulp House. We've reincarnated Pulp House in a second incarnation. Pulp House magazine. I'm the editor of that. And it's been going now for 2 years. And I buy stories from other writers for that, but only short stories and only in those. All the other books, and of course, Fiction River and Pulp House are ours. So WMG Publishing is only our books. It's got about 1,000 titles now. And climbing.
Is that all?
Yeah, it's ridiculous amounts. It's just crazy.
Do you have any advice for maybe authors who are right now just self-publishing their own work and are thinking maybe they do want to form a publishing company and edit some anthologies and that kind of thing?
Don't do it. Just
too much work.
Oh, good God, yeah. And it's the wrong focus for you. The reason we could do it is because we have so many employees. At one point we had 9 employees. We have a 7,000 square foot building in Lincoln City that is still there and full of stuff and that. We don't have that many employees now, but we have a lot of employees. And so we had the room and the space to do it. And Chris and I love editing short fiction. We just love short fiction. We would never edit anybody else's novels or anything like that. That's just not going to do that. But we love short fiction. And so it suits us. It suits who we are. It's our project. It's our voices in it, as editor. But no, it's not worth the time. If you're starting off as you got to have a publishing company to publish your own stuff, in indie world. So you already have a publishing company. Keep your focus on your own work. Keep your focus on your stuff. Don't start promoting other people's stuff until you're way down the road. It's just not worth it. You may think it's going to be fun and worth it. It's not. It's just not. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort.
That's awesome. The only place where I could see it possibly working is if somebody just doesn't want to write anymore, but they still want to be involved,
Then if they want to move over from the writing to the publishing side, that's perfecly fine.
But why would they want to move from writing is my question.
And some people burn out on writing. I mean, that's understandable. It's understandable. But we keep it down for Chris and I. We keep it down to a minimum of work. I basically read all the stories for Pulp House and then put them all together and do an introduction, and then that's the last I see of it until I get the finished book in my hand.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I want to have more minions.
Oh yeah, minions are great. Although I don't think I'd ever call Alison Longuera a minion.
No, she's not a minion.
No, basically is a major professional in the business on the publishing side. We got so lucky to find her. And
she had major surgery, and it didn't even faze her, it seems.
Well, 4 or 5 months it did, but she had major brain surgery. But yeah, she's fantastic. She runs WMG Publishing. We don't run it at all.
Yeah.
She's the publisher. She's the CEO. She runs the whole thing. I mean, Chris and I own the company, but she runs it. It's hers. She's the boss. We call her the boss.
Okay, so we're going to transition to workshops. That's still under the WMG Publishing umbrella. Mm-hmm. You and Kristine, or Chris, all right, it's weird calling her Kristine. I'm so used to calling her Chris.
Chris is fine. Yeah.
You guys put on a lot of workshops. Which are your personal favorites? And then I have another part of that question that I'll ask in a bit.
Well, honestly, I like the masterclass, but it's ending this next year. The one in October 2020 is the last one in that structure and in that format. I think the anthology workshop for me is the best one. And then Chris teaches 3 of the craft workshops where she's down inside people's craft. They're very limited. There are only 12 professionals that are come to them. I think the anthology for me is the most fun. I get to read so much short fiction and get to buy for Pulp House and other stuff if I find a story that fits. And I just love it. That's the fun one. Because once you're through all the early stuff, the workshop itself is just fun. It's just reading stories and talking and going out to lunch with people and hanging around at night in the suite with people and stuff like that. So that's my fun. I like the online ones too, but I think
In
of
person.
all of them, that's the one I like.
So which are the longest running and how have they changed over the years?
The longest running one is, it would have to be the master class, but it's changed dramatically over the years, just dramatically. It started off as a 2-week, 12 writers only, submersive thing in both writing and in business. And that was back in the traditional days. We started the first one of that in 1999 as an experiment with 6 writers. I call them the Slacker 6, but they turned out to not be slackers in any way, shape, or form. In fact, you guys would recognize 4 out of the 6 of their names as New York Times bestsellers. But we started with those 6, and then in 2020, in 01, we did the first full 12 masterclass, and went from there. But it's changed dramatically. It's not even the same. We stopped that version of it, and then started, when Indie came in, we started this version that we have now that's really dramatically changed even from that first year. The first year we started it was how to be an indie writer, how to publish, how to get your stuff up. I think we were doing PowerPoint covers, it was just something. But now it's full upper level professional for indie writers, and all the licensing and all the other stuff that we do now. It'll be a good one this last time, but we're killing it. That's the end of it. The second longest run is the anthology workshop. That started off with an editor out of Technobooks by the name of Denise Little. And we called it the Denise Little Workshop. And basically it was a weekend workshop. People would turn in a story ahead of time, and Denise and I would go through them and decide whether we were going to buy them or not for the anthology. And then that day they would also have to write a story overnight and turn it in the next day for a live anthology that would be in DAW or Bain or something like that. So a lot of those anthologies out of that early 2000s that were in Bain and DAW were stories written overnight at the Denise Little Workshop on the coast in Lincoln City, the entire anthology. And I got a bunch of them on my shelf up here that are just, all the authors wrote them overnight. So,
we've got a couple questions coming up about your thoughts on editing, but we have a couple more first on, on the workshops for authors who are thinking of doing maybe an online workshop or in person to learn the craft stuff. Are there any, there's a lot of options out there now. Are there any red flags they should look for? Anything they should be careful when choosing one?
Yeah. With us, any of them are fine. I would start with the depth workshop on all the ones we do. That's the foundation workshop. Depth in writing. That's how to get readers into your stories. But on others, the first thing I would look at is who's teaching it, and how long have they been around? What's their experience? And does it fit what you're looking for? And is it at your level of writing? That's what I would look at. But mostly look at the credentials of the person. If they've only got 2 or 3 or 4 novels out and they're teaching something, go away, run. Someone like Dave Farland, who's been a New York Times bestseller, been around since 3 or 4 years after I came in. He has a certain way of teaching that is down in the words a lot. And that's perfectly fine if that's what you're looking for. But Dave has the credentials. So Dave Farland and Kevin Anderson's thing he does up there with Superstars, things like that. Look at the people behind it and see what their credentials are and see if they've moved into the modern era. If you've got someone who says, well, I'm going to teach you how I broke in, and they broke in 1987 like I did with my first novel, or 1982 when I started selling short stories, they're not going to be any value to you. It's just they're not going to be able to teach you anything. So watch if they're up to date, and number 2, if they have the credentials. And if they've only got 3 or 4 novels or something, run away. Just run away.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's funny how easy it is to figure that out, and I'm sure a lot of people just don't look.
Yeah.
But all right, so when it comes to workshops, let's say somebody's just getting started in their indie career. Would you say that focusing on craft or focusing on business, like, is one of those preferable to the other?
No, they need to be a balance. In my opinion, you need to balance both. You can't, if you get too one-sided or the other, you're going to be in trouble at some point. I think there's a third area in there, though. You got to learn craft and continue to learn craft. The minute you think you've got it, you're done as a writer. You're finished. You'll fade away in very short order if you stop learning. And which is why Chris and I do so many workshops, is because it helps us learn. We keep learning. The second thing is the business. If so many writers I know are paying like far too much in taxes, or they're not keeping track of stuff, or they don't even understand intellectual property or copyright or licensing or any of the other stuff that goes on. So you've got to be learning that piecemeal, and it's a lot to learn, and you never stop learning there either. I think the third thing is productivity. That's the other one. If you're not productive in this new world, you're done. You're just done. This new world we reverted back to the old pulp era very, very quickly, in literally a space of like 5 years. And I would stay clear away from traditional publishing at this point in time, until their contracts change, until other stuff change. Short story traditional publishing is perfectly fine. Their contracts are good. The rights revert within 3 or 4 months after publication. They're good promotion. But traditional book publishing, the big five, they're going to take all your rights, maybe publish you, maybe not. You're going to end up with a scam agent, because I don't hardly know of any agents who aren't scams at this point in time. And the reality is they're going to take all your copyright, and you'll never own the book again, and you'll never get it back, because they got to hold it for their bottom line. So indie's the way to go. It's growing. It's becoming, well, it's already a huge part of publishing. Can't even be tracked.
Every now and then you see a graph where it's like, indie authors as a cohort have eclipsed, main publishing, certainly in the ebook space.
And they can't keep track of it. And you can, if your goal in life is to see your book in a bookstore, you can do that indie. It's not worth it. It's not a profit and loss, but if it's a bucket list thing, then you can do it in indie easy. Traditional publishers don't have, I call it magic fairy dust. They don't have fairy dust they can sprinkle on the books and they appear in a bookstore. No, they just know how to get it in. You can learn how to get it in as an indie publisher too.
Yep. All right. So one more question about craft workshops. Mm-hmm. This is a problem that, basically my role on this show, I mentioned this, and we have a group we were talking about, but my role on this show is to illustrate that I have made all of the mistakes. I'm the what not to do. So I knew early on that I didn't know business, and I could write a book, as illustrated by the fact I had written some. Mm-hmm. So I did almost all of my focus on business workshops. And you mentioned how you need to continue to learn craft. I sort of figured early on that I would know all of the craft I need just from continuing to write. And then I started going to places where there was both. And I discovered that every single time I had a craft panel, I learned a tremendous amount that really improved me as a writer. So I want to say how, again, you're saying we need to balance mm-hmm. on what you're learning, but what would you say, let's say you can't afford to go to craft workshops. Mm-hmm. Is there as much to be gained just from, say, critique groups or things like that, or should you be focusing for professionals?
You need to put it this way. If you were going to go be a lawyer, and you said, I want to be a lawyer, and you're going to go to 7 years of college, you're going to spend all that money and all that time and all that effort to be a lawyer so you can hang out a shingle in a little local town and be a lawyer in a local town. And that's what you're going to do. And you're not going to think anything twice about spending that money and moving to a different place to go to school and getting into a law school and doing all that stuff and spending all that money. And yet professional writers are international writers. We don't hang out a shingle in Lincoln City, Oregon, or even Las Vegas. We don't. We function on an international level around the world. And yet writers think, I don't have to do that. I don't have to earn or learn as much as I would to be a little local attorney or a doctor, where people's lives are in their hand. And yet we entertain people all over the world. And writers have this belief system as, because I could write, my English teacher in high school said I was good, that's enough. It's not enough. It's a continuous thing. The problem with writing comes in is that writers can't see it. Okay. And so I'm constantly telling writers to study the bestsellers, the long-term bestsellers. And, and then I'll hear back from beginning writers, oh, that Cussler, he can't write his way out of a paper bag. And I'm thinking, he's forgotten more about writing than you know. Same with King, same with Kuntz, same with Nora Roberts, same with Danielle Steele, and on and on. These people who've been around a long time, they're masters. Those are the ones that people should be studying. But you can study them by going to a store or online and buying their book and then just typing it in. Just type it in into your own manuscript. You will learn more by typing in the first couple chapters of a major bestsellers novel than you can ever imagine, That's one way to do it. But if you have the attitude that you can't spend the money, that you can't spend the time, that you can't do it, you're not going to do it. That's the bottom line. This is an international profession, and you have to, if you're going to be at the top of an international profession, you've got to give it the effort, you just have to. And I'm sorry to be so blunt about that, but it just has to be there. And there's lots and lots of ways to learn. But if you can't afford it at this point, then why aren't you typing in New York Times bestselling writers? Why aren't you typing them in? Why aren't you going online? But finding the places that are free, and get what you can. Here's the problem what people can't see. Here's the analogy I use that tends to help people understand it. Say you walked into a giant building and you walk through the front door, and this is a huge front door, more people coming and going, just like this. Everybody in that mezzanine and in that big thing is a wannabe writer. But from the outside, that's all they think the building is that one floor. That's it. And if they just say, oh, I've got enough, I know everything that's on this floor, and they go back out the door, they're done. Okay. What goes on is the building above that thing. Every time you find a staircase or find an escalator or find an elevator to get to the next floor, that's you've learned something. And every time you go to the next floor, you realize, oh my God, there's floors above me. And the floors keep going up. I've been doing this for 40 years. I sold my first short story in 1974. Okay. And I'm still finding floors above me. I'm still typing in other writers' work. Every time I get to something and go, how the heck did that person do that? What do? I go and type it in. Because I run it through my own fingers in my own manuscript format, and I see it. And learning never ends. That's why I teach, is because I get these questions from people that go, how do you do this? And I'm like, I don't know. I've never thought of it that way. So I learn.
That's a great way to learn. I love that, the philosophy that there's always something more to learn. There's never ending.
And you can't see it when you're standing in a mezzanine. You can't see the next floor. You just don't even know it's there. You don't even know where the entrances are to it. That's the problem.
So we're going to move on to actually writing. So that's a great segue, writing into writing. You write into the dark, which is a much better way to say pants.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so what advice do you have for authors who prefer not to outline when it comes to productivity?
When it comes to productivity, you'll be a lot more productive if you just write into the dark. Almost everybody I know needs a trigger. Whether the trigger is a phrase, I use titles a lot, or some sort of trigger that will sit them down and start them just creating a character. And then if you understand depth in writing and how to pull readers in, you already got your first 400 to 2,000 words, just by doing that. And then the reality is that you just write the next line and write the next line. The best way to think this through is, as a reader, we start on a book on page 1 and we read in a direct line all the way to the end, to the last word. It's just a straight line. Okay. And so early writers, when you think, I want to be a writer and I want to write a novel, they think they have to write it like that, in that straight line, because that's the way they always read all those books, all those years. They always read them in a straight line. So the reality is no, you don't have to do that. In fact, you shouldn't. That's why people think, oh, I've got to outline. Oh, because how can I be so smart to put all that stuff down? Well, no, what you do is you kind of go along for 300 or 400 words, and then you come out of the timeline. And if you don't understand that concept, go read Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, or see the movie Slaughterhouse-Five. Billy Pilgrim is the main character. He's unstuck in his life, in his own life. He can move anywhere he wants at any given point inside of his own life, from his birth to his death. Okay? From the first word of a novel to the last word of a novel. You, as the writer, are unstuck in time. You don't have to stay on the timeline. You can jump up and go back. So basically what I do, my method and a lot of other pros, is that we'll write 300, 400, 500 words, whatever's comfortable. And then I sort of bog down and I immediately come out of the timeline, go back to the opening, and go through touching everything again, fixing mistakes, fixing everything. I never write sloppy. Never write sloppy. That trains your creative voice to be sloppy. So you never put things in brackets. You never, oh, I'm going to come back to that later. You fix it now and get all the way through, so that when you get back to that point where you stopped, then you've got momentum and you just move forward another 300 or 400 words. And then you cycle again. So when I'm looking at a book and I'm watching, when I'm writing a book, if you trace my pattern inside that timeline, it would be cycle, cycle, cycle. Oh, got to go back farther to fix something. Cycle, cycle, cycle. And it just would be this big bunch of loops all the way through it until I finally get to the end. I'm a one draft writer. It's all done, and it's all done in creative voice. I don't ever let my critical voice get anywhere near it. In fact, I don't even look at it again after that. I have a copy editor, and that's it. Chris reads my first drafts, and when, by and large, she's one of the best. She's got a Hugo for editing, and she's my first reader, so I'm very lucky. But I ignore half of what she says. I don't. It's my book. I've been around as long as she has. I know what I want. And I just ignore it. And I just let it be my book. It's my voice. It's my book. Yeah. She'll tell me if something's confusing or if there's a typo, and I fix those. And so my second draft after Chris reads it usually takes on a novel, usually takes me 30 minutes. And then I send it off for the copy editor. And
that's how you stay married for 28 years, as Kevin says.
You ignore what you need to ignore, and you never tell them what you've ignored.
I love it so much.
Ever. You never have a conversation about the book after it's read.
Make sure Chris doesn't listen to this episode. Well,
she knows. And I do the same. She does the same thing with me. I'm her first reader, and she ignores half of what I say too.
Nice.
Just nature of the beast. And I was nominated like 5 times for Hugo's for editing, and she just ignores half of what I say too, because it's her book. That's the way it should be. You have to grow at a certain level in this business. You quit listening to other people about your work. You become an artist. You become, nope, that's my book. That's the way I want it. Don't touch my commas. Don't touch nothing. This is my voice. Leave it alone. And I wish writers would get to that spot sooner rather than later with their work. You keep learning and keep adding into your voice, but you don't let other people mess with it. Never show anything in progress. Never show a work in progress to anybody. Chris doesn't see anything I write until it's completely done.
Yeah, I'm an outliner, but I'm also try to get it pretty close on the first draft, and I do to 100%, because I find if you do have to go back and edit, you're in a different state of mind. You're in that editor mind, and I don't know, it's a little harder to kind of see the story flowing along in your head. So I hate it when I hear the advice like, just put something down, just write. I'm like, no, figure it out first in your head and then write it. Otherwise, you're gonna be editing forever.
Yep.
And you had mentioned Heinlein's rules earlier, so I just wanted to touch on that. One of them, refrain from rewriting except to editorial order. Could you talk about some of the pitfalls? Did I get it wrong?
No, you got it right.
Okay.
If I was writing Heinlein's rules right now, at this point, because he wrote those when he was fairly young in his career, and he followed them up until he had brain issues, which was a while, and then he had to change because of the mental health issues he had. Most people don't realize that, but what occurs with Heinlein's rules is that third rule is what grabs everybody, but not really. The first rule is what gets everybody. First rule is you must write. Okay, and if there's 1 million people that say they want to be writers, that takes out 900,000 of them right there. They can't seem to make the time to write. And so out of the 100,000 that are left that even get to rule 2, which is you must finish what you write, that takes out another 90 of those, because the critical voice comes in and stops them. Oh, this isn't good enough. Well, how do they know it's not good enough? They're beginning writers. They don't know if they're writing something good or not. They would have no clue. But that critical voice is so powerful in so many people that it's like, oh, I don't want to embarrass myself. Oh, I don't want. So only about another 10% of what's left at that point actually get to rule 3. And rule 3 is the deadly one, because that's coming out of English classes. And that is, you must rewrite. And you hear these people say, oh, it's not done until it's been rewritten. And it's like, oh, crap. Luckily I bought into that in the 70s. I have to admit, I wrote my first 2 short stories, 1 draft, mailed them, both of them sold. And then I thought, oh, I'm going to be a writer. I better start learning what this is about. And then I started listening to English teachers and all the rewriting and all the other stuff. I didn't sell anything for the rest of the 70s. Nothing. Didn't even get anything but farm rejections, because I was rewriting them to death. And then it wasn't until fall of 1981 that I found Heinlein's Rules. And from that point on, I stopped rewriting and started selling again. Wish I'd have realized that back in 74, that the real reason I sold them was because it was my voice, my originalness, my story, and I didn't make it into sameness. Because when you rewrite, you create same. You polish, you take off all the edges. Polish, you hold a handful of polished rocks. They all look the same. They just all look the same. But if you hold that original rocks, they have different, before you polish them, they have edges and sharpness and differences. And then you throw them in a polisher. And that's what beginning writers do to their stories. And editors don't buy same. I'm sorry, we don't buy same. We've seen same to death. We don't buy same. And we can tell, after a while, we can tell when something's been rewritten to death, literally by glancing at it. It's sad. But of course, I'm an outlier, and Heinlein was an outlier clear back in 1947 when he said that. He was a pulp writer, and he was telling what the pulp writers do. As a lot of pulp writers said, I get a penny a word. I don't have time to rewrite.
And it does seem, you mentioned productivity. Learning to be productive is being very important if you want to have a career in the business. And if you're going and rewriting it 5 times, you're probably not going to be able to.
Yeah, I consider it going backwards in your career. If I'm writing something new, that's the fun, and especially writing in the dark. That's fun, and I love having fun. At my age, if I'm not having fun, I'm not doing it anymore. I don't need it. I don't need the money. I don't need this. I'm just not doing it anymore. And so writing new stories is fun. I get to create. I get to do this. But every time I'm always moving forward, looking forward. But if I had to rewrite, I'd have to turn around and go into my own past and rewrite something I'd already done. How boring and dumb is that? I know how it ends. I wrote it, I don't want to rewrite it. And so, it's just like, ugh. So I always face forward. I'm always doing the next thing. And if you just focus on doing the next thing and not fixing something in the past, which you can't fix, I consider everything I've written since 1974 a marker, like a milepost along my 40-year career or 50-year career, however long I've been doing this, 45 years. I consider it a milepost. So you can read a story. You can still read my very first published short story. You can still read the one that I put in that's in the first volume of Writers of the Future, 35 years ago. I have one in volume 35 right now too, because they asked me to write one 35 years later. So
it's funny, like how I don't know if it's funny. It makes perfect sense. How often you hear similar advice from people who have been at it for a long enough time. Where I think Stephen King has a thing where it's like, never tell anyone a story that you're writing, because once you're done telling it, you don't want to tell it again. All right. So, but let's say.
Let me add something on this rewriting thing.
Sure.
Realize that if I was talking to other people besides writers, if I was in a group of my readers and fans only, I'd tell them I rewrote 3 times. I just would tell them that, because they have to have an expectation of that. But see, and that's because they all came through the same system all of us did. They came through the English teaching system and the schools where everything is rewritten. And so if you're going to get someone to pay $5 for one of your books, they have to feel like you worked on it. So that's why you hear the big name writers saying, oh yeah, but they're just blowing steam. Oh yeah, I put 36 drafts on that. And Hemingway was the worst of this. He hated stupid questions, loathed them with a passion. You look at Hemingway, and he was a newspaper writer. He wrote one draft fast, hard, banged it out on a typewriter and turned it in. That's how he wrote Old Man and the Sea. In very few days, it won the Pulitzer. And so, but yet he'd get these stupid questions. So he'd tell people, oh, I wrote standing up. Oh, I wrote, 37 drafts, because he would just jerk around new writers, figuring if they're too stupid to figure it out, then it wasn't his problem, because he just got tired of all the stupid questions. And to this day, we're still trying to deal with Heinlein's stupidity. Joke.
That's hilarious. Okay, so let's say that like I have outlined and I have written Into the Dark with roughly equivalent
outline,
success.
You don't write Into the Dark. No outline. No outline.
So the question is, like, let's say that you're pantsing, you have an outlined up front.
Mm-hmm.
How do you avoid running into a dead end?
Oh, you run into them all the time.
So then is the trick that like you see the dead end coming and start to plan for it, or is the whole trick that you find a way to punch a hole through the dead end? Yeah.
Yeah, you do exactly. You just get inside your character's head. How would your character solve it? It truly is that simple. And think of it this way: writing a book is like riding a roller coaster. If you don't know where the next turn is, you don't know what's going to happen, but you do know you're going to end up at the ending and be happy. Okay, hopefully you don't fly off the track somewhere, but there's going to be points where you're going to feel like you're flying off the tracks, and that's the point of a good roller coaster, is when you like, is that going to really make that turn? Is it going to stay on the tracks? What you do, the simplest, and I'll tell you, the hardest to remember when you're in crisis mode, where you think you've written yourself into a horrid corner, is write the next sentence. Just back up a little bit and get to that point where you feel like you're stuck. Don't try to figure it out. Don't try to go out ahead, because that's your critical voice trying to figure it out. The critical voice is what's got you stopped. The critical voice, your creative voice knows where it's going. Your creative voice but it's just not telling you yet. So you go on and you just say, what is the next logical sentence after that sentence? And you just write it. And then you say the exact same question. What's the next logical sentence after that sentence? And pretty soon you pick up speed again. And then you get stuck again. You just write the next sentence. It is such a simple piece of advice. It works every time. But the problem is you can't remember it when you're, and I'll do that too. I'll come wandering out of my office and go, oh God, I got my characters, I'm stuck. Oh my God. And Chris said, well, just write the next sentence. I went, oh yeah, thank you. And back in and write the next sentence. So I have that actually over my computer now.
So I've got questions about, they're all related about burning out. So the first one is, so I know you actually have dealt with some burnout phases. Pretty much every writer has after they've been around for a while. How do you handle it how do you get through those?
Stand up again, do something different, write the book you've always wanted to write. And see, burnout comes from pressure more than anything else, of having to do it. You've got money pressure on it. You put money on your, go get a part-time job, something like that. Go do something different, and take the writing and literally, mentally, and maybe physically and emotionally, and pull it up and out and put it over onto a place where that's only going to be fun. That's only going to be fun. I'm going to go play over there. That's my play. And so stop telling your people that you're going to work. Don't ever use the word work with your writing. You're not working. Working is what we all do and we hate. And that causes writers to burn out. To me, writing is fun. It's just a joy. So just make it into the safe place. And so your world is burning out. You're tired. You don't want to deal with it. There's too much money pressures. Just clear all that out. Maybe go get a part-time job, and then keep the writing in a fun little corner, and eventually it'll build back up.
I really, really like that point. A lot of authors, they say, getting a job is like the end all of everything, all of their dreams. It just destroys their happiness. But I love that. That's fantastic. It's actually relieving to think.
It's actually the nature of the beast. Over the years, I've been lucky because I've always been able to work inside of publishing on my day jobs over the decades. No, there was one point where I was kind of like, oh, I wonder where the next contract's coming. And somebody came up to me and said, Dean, and it was after Pulp House, and said, Dean, you want to edit this thing called VB Tech, the fiction section of VB Tech? I didn't even know what VB Tech was. Virtual Basic Technology magazine had 250,000 readers. And they said, we want to do a science fiction section, 2 stories a month. And I'm like, sure, we'll pay you this. And so, I ended up for 2.5 years being the fiction editor for VB Tech magazine. And all I did was invite my friends. I mean, I went to every friend I had, Harlan and Jack Williamson and all the big names at that period of time, and said, write me an original story. I'll give you 10 cents a word.
Nice.
And it was the easiest job, and they paid me a lot of money to do it because it was this big, huge magazine that nobody inside of any fiction area even knew existed. And we couldn't get it any traction. In 2.5 years, we finally gave up of getting it traction. Nobody in science fiction and fantasy would even read it, even though it had Harlan and Jack Williamson and Mike Resnick and all the big names and Chris and all kinds of, nobody would read it. It wouldn't, because it was VB Tech magazine. It was a computer magazine.
So you kind of actually already answered my other questions. I was just like, you've already given advice for how authors should handle it. And then you've also said how you avoid it. I mean, do you ever run off and get a part-time job?
Well, I did. Sure. It wasn't part-time. I actually quit writing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When I burnt out and didn't want to deal with New York anymore and wanted nothing to do with New York, and realized my agent had been stealing from me. And, and things like that. And I just went, okay, I'm done with this system. I'm finished. Even though I'd been a New York editor. I mean, I'd edited through pocketbooks and other stuff at times. I just didn't want anything more with it. So I went and played professional poker.
I was hoping you'd mention that.
Yeah,
That's one of my favorite parts of your history.
Number of years, actually. I still wrote a little bit because they were throwing, I actually said, okay, I'm not going to take any of this work for hire. I'm not going to take ghosting novels unless it's for X amount of money. And at one point I had, I said, I won't take anything under $60,000 for a novel. And I can write a novel in about 7 or 8 days, an 80 to 90,000 word novel. It takes 7 or 8 days to write it. So it's no big deal. And they had to throw $60,000 to $70,000 to $80,000 at me before I'd even touch it. And that was in my poker days. And I made a lot more money playing poker. I was a professional poker player. I played in World Series and lots of tournaments and stuff. And, but that kind of cleared my mind. And then when the indie movement came in, that's the only thing that brought me back. Otherwise, I'd still be a professional poker player and I would never teach. If I'm not writing, I'm not teaching. That's my absolute rule. I had some people over the years that I admired highly, but they quit writing and became a teacher. And I won't do that. Like Algis Budrys, one of my mentors, but he became a teacher and an editor. He never wrote anymore. And I'm like, nope, the minute I stop writing, I'm done teaching. And so I got to be writing and being current, and I'll still be teaching and being current. Otherwise, I'm done. So I wasn't doing any teaching in that period of professional poker at all. I wasn't doing anything. And then suddenly I'm back in the indie movement and writing a lot. So, make sense?
Oh, of course. And I know that you've seen a lot of change in the industry, and I'm sure you've seen many authors just kind of disappear. What is it that you guys have been able to do to just adapt and continue to change and be able to keep making an income from your writing over the years?
I think it's watching other people go away, sadly. Writers tend, in the old traditional days, they tended to have 4 or 5 books. We had a real good friend of ours who was one of our supporters and a bookstore owner, and he was a curmudgeon. You either loved him or you hated him. And his name was Bill Trojan. He died about 2011, and at Worldcon, actually. And by and large, his attitude was, when we first came in, is that he called me a neo-pro for the longest time. And his rule was, when I published my 10th novel through New York, he would start calling me a professional, because most never got to 10. Most never got to 10. They would burn out at 3 or 4. And the first time I ever met him, I mean, I walked up to his table. I had a story in a Damon Knight anthology, and it was on his table. And I said, I got a story in there. Would you like me to sign it? And he looked up at me. We'd never met. He looked up at me and he said, why would I want some neo-pro defacing my book? And I'm like, okay, screw you. That's not quite what I said, but it was fairly close. And I walked off, and then we became best friends after, a number of years later. And that was the attitude he always had. So when I published my 10th book, I walked up to him, had the book signed to him, walked up to it, handed it to him and said, this is my 10th published novel out of New York. Am I now a professional? He said, yes, you are. And we went on from there. But, that was the attitude. Indie has a different set of rules now. I think indie is, can you survive for 5 or 6 or 7 years? And, a lot of people can't do it. They just can't do it. So we've watched so many people go. What they do is they get themselves in a position where they burn out quick. They can't sustain the pace that they've set for themselves. They've made writing their work and becomes hateful, and they can't, and they're pushing themselves. They're rewriting everything. That's death after 4 or 5 books. In this modern world, you can't be prolific and do that. It's just the nature of the beast at this point. So how do we stand up? We just keep going. Every time something knocks us down, we go, yeah, move on. There's always, and nothing matters. Nobody cares. That's the real thing that beginning writers don't understand, is nobody cares in this business. You care. Maybe one of your parents care, if you're lucky. If you have good parents, maybe one of them cares, but nobody, maybe your spouse cares, some, but by and large, nobody cares. So you can write, you have tremendous freedom to write what you want to write. If you get a rejection, nobody cares. If something sells, nobody cares. You are total freedom to dare to be bad, to try new things, to have fun, because when it comes right down to it, nobody cares. And that is so freeing. It really is. And if you're in this business because you want a whole bunch of people and success and fame, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah.
Totally in the wrong business.
There's like 6 authors that anybody knows what they look like. It's just a thing.
I don't think so. I think Nora Roberts, Steve King, Dean Koontz could walk right by you on the street. You'd never notice them.
It's true. All right. So we've talked a little bit about, there's a lot of reasons that you might have a dip in your career. And we talked a little bit about personal ones. And there are also external reasons, like just a seismic shift in the industry. Do you handle personal and external changes differently? Is it always just pull yourself up, or how do you reassess when something happens that maybe was out of your control?
Yeah. Oh yeah. You always step back and reassess. In fact, Chris and I have a habit of looking at the coming year in December every year. It started, that's what freelancers should be doing. You should always plan out what your next year is going to be, and what you're doing and where your money's coming from and all that sort of stuff. Now it's pretty much the same. Health issues, that's what happened with Chris. She was derailed for a couple of years, although she kept writing through it as much as she could, but she was down to not being the prolific Chris that we all knew. Now she's back to complete health. Health issues will do that. Just aging will do that. I'll be 70 in my next birthday. So, aging is the nature of the beast. It's kind of one of those things where the seismic shifts in the business, you just roll with them. I'll tell you a real quick story. The only reason I have anything to do with indie publishing is thanks to 2 writers by the name of Scott William Carter, great writer, and Michael Totten, who was a major reporter and now is a great writer, fiction writer. They were both students of ours in Eugene, Oregon. And they were young, they were in college. And when the indie movement started and the Kindle first came out, Scott and Michael were just badgering us to come and and I wanted nothing to do with it. In New York publishing, back in the 90s, we were having meetings about about electronic books. And then in 95, we were having more meetings because the sky was falling. Electronic books were going to change everything. In 2000, I have a trophy up here on my wall that I am in the top 25 bestsellers of electronic books in the year 2000 in Rocket Books. Okay. So by the time 2009 and 8 came along, when the Kindle was coming out, the sky had fallen too many times for me. I was done. I wanted nothing to do with this electronic. It wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to see it. I was done. And Scott and Michael were on the cutting edge of it. And both of them said, hey, we got to tell these guys. And so they badgered us to come and have dinner with us. And over that dinner, they made me believe that there might be something. So Scott came over to Lincoln City and put up a projector and told us how to put in books into Amazon and into Barnes & Noble at that time and into Smashwords at that time. And that was only 3 places you could put them up. And he showed us how to do covers. He showed us how to do it. And I went, oh, this is fun. So I put up 2 of Chris's and 2 of mine in one afternoon, 2 short stories. And then proceeded to forget about it. I was playing poker, didn't care. I had a book that I had to write on that was a ghost novel that someone had thrown a lot of money at me for. And 2 months later, Chris came in and said she'd made $12, $15, something like that, off of those 2 short stories. And I realized at that moment, those guys were right. And that was the complete shift. I literally did not play another hand of poker after that day. I just did nothing but indie publish.
Scott was at the last business masterclass, wasn't he? I met him.
Yep, Scott Card. Yeah.
He's the one that came up with the "Would I be better off writing?" Isn't he?
Wibbo.
Yeah, Wibbo.
That's going to be on his gravestone. I'm fairly certain. Would I be better off writing? That's how you ask any question. If you say, "Oh, like for example, the question: Would I be better off publishing other people's work?" No. Would I be better off writing? Yes. Wibbo question on that one's very easy, but that's how a lot of this stuff, you always say, would I be better off writing than promoting this last book? Yes, you'd be better off writing, because your best promotion is your next book.
Totally agree with that. I wasn't able to release a book from January through October, and partially because I had a baby, and
yeah, I think there were some life issues going on there. Yeah.
Yes. But I mean, my promotions, like they weren't as effective during that time because, I wasn't releasing regularly.
No new books.
So.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you offer a lot of services to authors through online and in-person workshops and your blog and your interviews and things like that, like what we're doing right here. You keep yourself really busy. You run a company. You do all sorts of things all over the place. Well, Allison runs a company.
Allison runs a company. Yeah. I'm the CFO. I handle all the money. I write all the checks.
Yes. So what are the biggest tips you have for authors dealing with crazy and busy lives and schedules and who still want to be prolific?
Make time for it. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 15 minutes here. Writing isn't a carve out 2 hours and hope the world leaves you alone. That doesn't work. World never leaves you alone. So you just get yourself into a mind, and it's a mindset. It is a mindset, because you'll believe, I need 2 hours to gear up and to get going. No, you don't. No, just 15 minutes gives you 200 words, and then you have another 15 minutes, then another 15 minutes, and pretty soon you got 1,000 words done for a day, and that's a lot of books in a year. It just works out that way, and just try to do it every day, just every day. Chris has a T-shirt that she got from Downton Abbey that says, "What's a weekend?" There are no weekends for writers. It's just, what's a weekend? We don't know what a weekend is. We can't even remember sometimes when a weekend goes by. So, we do a lot of things for writers, trying to keep them motivated, trying to keep them teaching, that sort of stuff. Try to keep them learning, I guess is what I should say.
It seems like the people who are really driven will find a way. There's these people on Wattpad that write books on their phones, while they're at their kids' soccer match or something. And I can't imagine it, but, they get them done. Yeah.
Every so often I'll do something just to break up my routines. Like I'll grab my iPad and go off to a buffet here and just sit in the buffet for 3 or 4 hours with my little iPad, sending everything back every so often back to my computer here in my office. But I pretty much, I just do it to break things up, just to do something different. So there's always ways of doing it. 10, 15 minutes is more than enough. So people who are really busy, find 15 minutes. You can find it.
My last question for you, as someone who's written under numerous names and in numerous genres, is just, do you have any tips for the authors who that's their muse? They want to be in different genres and maybe they want to have a number of pen names, but they see people really focused on one niche or one genre, maybe doing better than they are. Do you have any tips for those folks?
Write more. You gotta overwhelm the system. And put it all under one name. See, everything is dealing with one name these days. Everything is tracked by name. So my mystery novels are under Dean Wesley Smith. My science fiction novels are under Dean Wesley Smith. Just make sure you're clear on your covers, clear on your sales copy, what it is. I tell people it's a mystery novel. It is not one of my science fiction novels. It's not one of my, Bryan Street novels or my humor novels in Poker Boy or any of the other series that I do. It's simply, it's a mystery novel. It's this. And so you put it all under one name. Then it doesn't matter what you write. And some of your fans will go, well, I like his mystery novels. I don't like his science fiction. That's perfectly fine. But they can find them all.
I'm taking notes right now. Write more than the people, that are your competitors. I'm like, this is good stuff.
Yeah, but keep it all under one name. That's the key. I have more pen names than we can still find because I can't track them all down. but keep them all under one name. Just be really clear on your blurbs, your sales copy, and your covers. Make sure they're branded to whatever genre they're in.
Okay, so from the business masterclass this past year, I learned something about you that really surprised me, and that was the length of book you prefer to write. What is your favorite length, and how has that changed over the years?
Oh, traditional. My first novel was 60-some thousand words long, because back in the late 80s, it was still growing at that point. Authors are forced in traditional publishing to write to contract. We sign a contract, and what occurred from the early 80s up until mid 90s, when the distribution collapse happened, is that publishers had to charge more for their books because of their overhead and all the other stuff in New York going up. So the only way they could do that is because paper's the cheapest part. That's nothing. And so the only way they could do that was to get the authors to write longer. So every year there was contract creep. And when I started, my contract was 60 to 70,000 words. When I ended in New York, they were all 90 to 100,000 words. And that was over a 15-year period. But before that, when I grew up reading, all the books were 30 and 40,000 words. All of them, all the mysteries, all the science fiction. It was rare. I mean, Dahlgren was a monster book when Samuel Delany came out with that in 1970 something or late 60s. That was a huge book. That was like 150,000 words long. It was gigantic. The Tolkien rings were these gigantic things. If you look at them now, they're nothing, and so the reality is back in those days, 40 to 50,000 words were what I grew up reading. That's how my clock works. So the minute I was free to do what I wanted to do, I snapped right back to that. All my novels are in the 40 to 50,000 word range. Also, they're a lot easier to write, and they're a lot cleaner. They don't have all the goofy side loops and stuff that you have to do to pad a book to 80 to 100,000. And I had to pad all the time. I would always finish a draft for a New York publisher, and it would be 65,000, 70,000 words. And I'm like, okay, I can't turn this in. It's under contract. And I would have to go back in and put in the characters going off on a little thing and then bringing them back. It's just so annoying. I hated doing it. It felt like it was ruining the book. But now I can do what I want. So my books are 40, 50,000. Every so often I'll jump to 60, but only if the story demands it. I write what the story demands, and that's what my brain spits out. So my last 100 novels have been between 40 and 50,000. My first 100 were between 70 and 100,000. Wish I could have done those earlier.
So, and now you say that's the length of book that that naturally comes out of you. It's what you gravitate toward. Let's say that the book that naturally comes out of you is longer than that. It's like the common wisdom, obviously, is that if you write shorter, you get more books out. Like there is utility to writing shorter. Is it worth trying to train yourself to write shorter, or should you always shoot for what your comfort zone is?
Write the book you want to write. Write the story you want to write. That's the only success down the road, is just write what you want to write. No matter what it is, no matter what genre it is, no matter what some silly marketing advice that someone's given you, write the book you want to write. It's the only way you can be long-term. I mean, I love Star Trek. I love Spider-Man. I own comic stores. Just sold our last comic store 2 years ago, or actually last February. I've owned comic stores and everything else. So I love writing Spider-Man and X-Men and all that. Write what you love. It's just no fun not writing what you love or writing to market.
That leads me to a follow-up question, because I have a series where the first book was like 75,000 words, and that was the length of that book. It just felt right. But I'm more like you. My natural length is 40 to 50,000 words long. And the second book in that series was 40,000 words long. And so I had readers that were like, they felt gypped. Is that okay to say that word?
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Lindsay says no.
It's not PC, thumbs down.
So they felt like I cheated them because the first book was 75,000 words and the next one was 40,000. How do you handle that sort of a situation?
You're the writer. Don't care. Don't care. You're in control. You're the god of your own universe. Just say, yeah, that's just how the story came out. Be real cheery with your fans. Just how the story came out and everything else, and you never know what's going to come out next.
Yeah, I love the 40.
Don't apologize. Just say that's what it is.
Yeah. When you said that in the business masterclass, that was your natural length. I was sitting here thinking that like Lindsay's fantastic. Her natural length is like 400,000 words. And so
see, Joe and I grew up reading epic fantasy, so maybe it's whatever you read as kids.
I think it's 100%. It's how your mind formed around lengths.
So then how does that explain me? Because I was reading Michael Crichton growing up, and his aren't 40,000 words long.
Yeah, but they're not that long.
Are they not? I don't know how long they are.
No, Crichton's books tended to be about 110, 120,000 words, and shorter earlier on. Andromeda Strain, I think, was only a 50,000 word novel.
Yeah, but that's still like almost 3 times longer than my natural length. The 110, but it made me feel better.
Just let the story be what the story wants to be. I mean, Chris is doing that now. She just came out with a story that we could barely get into hardback because it was like 2 pages underneath the maximum that we could get into hardback. And that was The Renegade that just came out in her Diving Universe series. And now, she's going on and, and I'm fairly certain the next one will be long too, but you never know. She's all over the map, and you write what you want to write and don't care. Just don't care.
I love all these things we're talking about, Chris. Ignore half of her advice, and she's just all over the map.
She's all over the map. Yeah.
All right. So last question for you. You have a magazine that's just for readers, and it's only stuff you write, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called Smith's Monthly.
Smith's Monthly. Okay. So what do you put in it? How do you keep it up? And how have readers responded to that?
Well, it started off when I started into the indie movement, and I knew I had to be prolific. And I knew I had to, I really sucked at being, what's the word for it? Organized. And I thought, I got to have some vehicle to organize what I'm doing, at least the stories I want. And I write about 50 to 60 short stories a year. And, and then anywhere from 12 to 15 or 16 novels a year. And then I do collections and other big books too. And so one of the aspects of that is that I thought I was a pulp collector and a digest collector. And so I was holding a Mike Shane mystery magazine in my hand, and I'm like, oh, too bad Mike Shane didn't actually write every story in that. And I heard myself say that. And I went, So I started talking to Chris about it, and she said, yeah, you could do that. Just call it Smith's Monthly and put 1 novel every month and 4 or 5 short stories. So it's 70,000 to 80,000 words of my fiction. And I do an introduction in it and, and promote my own books through it, and do little ads. Like it looks like a regular magazine. Well, that's Pulp House. Well, my big run of Smith's Monthly is back up there. I can't reach them. And I got 44 issues, 44 months in a row. I just kept doing that. And so there's 230 or 40 short stories are in there that have been published in there. Some have never been published anywhere else. I sort of fell down on getting them out independently. So, there's half of those 200 short stories are original just to Smith's Monthly. My idea was to publish the novel in Smith's Monthly, then publish it independently, standalone, a month or so later, and then put up all the short stories independently. So, I'd have Smith's Monthly selling, and it has subscriptions, and then like that. Then when Chris got sick, it went on hiatus. Mm-hmm. And so my last one was June or May 2 years ago. And so I'm going to bring it back and with number 45 and see how far I can go with this one. My goal is to get past 100 copies, 100 issues. But nice. It's just a way of me to keep track of everything. It's more than anything else.
You've done Kickstarters for those, right?
No, never for Smith's Monthly. For Pulp House. For Pulp House magazine we've done. But no, I did a Kickstarter last January for Make 100. I wanted to take 100 of my short stories and make them into paperbacks, individual paperbacks, which you can do these days. And I love those little individual paperbacks. And so I had to do original covers, wrap covers for all of them, and like that. And I'm about halfway through that right now. And
now,
so,
these are like physical magazines that you're doing, right? And how do you handle that? With like readers, you print that once a month and you mail it to them, and
if they subscribe to the paper copy, which is more expensive, they also can subscribe to the electronic, or they can get the electronic or PDF copy. Yeah.
And how do you handle sales for it?
I just every so often we'll make some announcement on it, or It's
No,
up
I
on.
mean the money part.
Do what?
The money part.
It's just a subscription through,
Okay.
They keep track of the subscriptions up in WMG.
Okay.
I do all the layout for it because I want to be in control of it. So I actually do the InDesign files and everything else for it, and then just send it to them, and then they put it up. They put it up on all, they put it up wide, and then they put it up, and they're subscribers. I think in a couple of the Kickstarters, for Pulp House, we actually said you can buy all 4 of the magazines from the WMG does, one of which is Smith's Monthly. And so, there were 2 or 3 people every time we do a Kickstarter that actually subscribe to Smith's Monthly for some reason or another, even though there hasn't been an issue for almost 2 years.
Yeah, it's really, I don't know, it's something I've always wanted to do. I love the magazine idea.
It's an organization system.
Yeah.
That's how I looked at it. It's just an organization system, and it gets them up. And put it this way, it's another cash stream. See, writers in indie, we need to be cash stream focused. And so it's just another cash stream, nothing more. And so I get, it trickles in, but all 44 of them are still for sale.
Nice. And that's on your website?
Oh, no, it's up on WMG Publishing.
Okay.
WMGpublishing.com. Yeah, I think so. WMGpublishinginc.com. Yeah, and it's up there, and you can just look at it and says sort by things, and you can just hit Smith's Monthly, and it'll show you all the issues. I will have a Smith's Monthly website. It's 3/4 of the way done. It was an older one, and I'm revamping it now. And that'll have all my stories and all the Smith's Monthlies and all the novels. But that's a ways away because I even had an app on it for a while. Never launched the app, but I had finished the app. So I was going to have a Dean Wesley Smith app. I try everything once or twice. It's stupid. Sometimes you got to try the stupidest ideas.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. I just love that every time I listen to interviews with you, you've been in the business for a long time, but you're not stuffy about it. And you offer a lot of advice and a lot of, inspiration to authors who are, doing it for a long time and just starting out. So yeah, I've been taking notes. I'm excited. It makes me just get pumped up,
Well, I feel like I'm still new in this business too. Even though I'm an old fogey now and been at it a long time, I still feel like I'm learning every day. And that's fun. I enjoy the fun.
Yeah. So, okay. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Where do you want people to go when they want to look you up and get information on you?
I think the best place would be right now. If you want to know about the workshops, the online workshops and stuff, come to deanwesleysmith.com. That's where I do little hints every so often and get snarky about different stuff and things like that, about rejections the last couple of days and things like that. But or I announce workshops, online workshops that are new, things like that, deanwesleysmith.com. And if you want to know more about all my writing stuff and the different series I do, just go to WMG Publishing Inc.com and just click under my name, sort by author, and it'll be a lot. It'll be a lot. And of course, you can Google me or whatever. I don't have any, I need a new Wikipedia. No one has updated my Wikipedia page for like a decade. So I can't do it, So any of you out there want to update my Wikipedia page, have at it. Please, somebody. I can't get anybody to seem to do it. So I guess it's not that hard. It's just I can't do it because they won't let me.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up now, if that's okay with everyone. Okay. Got it.
I see nodding.
We are okay. We are your PC-friendly podcast and appreciate everyone listening.
I hope I didn't say anything off.
No, Andrea, but I only know because my beta readers have caught me on that one. I'm oblivious.
I'm old, so you got to really watch people like me.
All right. Okay. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show today. We'd like to thank Joshua Pearson for producing the show and our listeners again, those of you who help us out by supporting and sharing news about our podcast and leaving reviews. Please visit sixfigureauthors.com. That's the number 6 for the episode notes and to leave a comment or to ask a question for a future show. And we do have our Facebook group still. So search for Six Figure Authors and check out the show notes for the link to that. Also remember, please answer those questions because occasionally we still have authors who don't answer the questions and we're like, we want to verify that you actually listen to the show. So That's it for today. We'll talk to everyone later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So long, everybody.